These guys, this is the TYT MD380. Okay, they're typically obtainable depending on where you get them from, meaning maybe Amazon, maybe at a ham fest, right around the $80 to $90 range. You know, give or take. The 380 is a UHF only handy-talkie, but it's analog and digital, so you can program it for analog repeater channels as well as digital.
I'm going to go to yours. You're on MND.
So just
one single VHF repeater in the state with mediocre coverage. Everything's in UHF. The only place you'll really find DMR on VHF is on the East Coast in the DC area where the UHF band is available for use.
and the Bay Area out in California.
So what kind of rates does UHF get? How close do you have to be to repeaters?
Well, I'm going to talk about
Okay,
it.
okay.
KBs are
Okay.
all on the country.
About from here over to the counter.
That's not enough.
You're on MSP. Go to
Well, we had some traffic, but it has subsided. But I'll turn it up later. It does work just fine.
You're on MSP.
Okay, so the reason
We'll try
that I put this thing, well, there's two reasons. First of all, we didn't have a speaker. So that was reason one for this month. And then reason two was because I had just gone through this in the last 5 weeks. And as most of you know, I travel back and forth every week. That'll be coming to an end at the end of next month. But you know, it's my initial experience with programming the code plugs was very similar to anyone's first experience. I actually grabbed the one that you guys put out there for Minnesota DMR, and that was fine. So getting in through a repeater is a little bit challenging, but I'll get into that a little bit. So what's been happening basically is there's been a shift to DMR, I think, for a couple of reasons. As you know, most of the guys in here are HF people or have a lot of familiarity with HF. A lot of CW ops in the club. While that's still decent, you know, we're at a solar minimum or near the solar minimum, and the conditions have really been okay. When I first got licensed in 2012 and came into the club, the conditions were definitely much better, and you could work 10 meters much more often worldwide, but you know, now it's a lot of noise, and above 40 or above 20. 20 is still not too bad, but even 20 on some days is a little bit dicey. So I think that's a factor. I think the other factor is that the price entry point of this is attractive, and it's new, of course, relatively new, not really new as a technology, as you know from the prior pitch that we had on the DMR technology. It's not all that new, but in the amateur radio community has kind of grabbed hold, and either before or as a result of analog VHF, UHF repeaters are kind of quiet. So anywhere you go, and Twin Cities is you know, one area, but I've been out there in Orange County all year and have been to some other places, and I've noticed that it's pretty quiet. On the West Coast, there are repeaters that go up to 23 centimeter and down to VHF, down into 50 megahertz, 6 meters. A lot of repeaters in California, and they're very quiet. A lot of clubs out there. You know, one guy told me on DMR, told me that the NorCal club, their repeater has been dead quiet, you know, as a result of DMR. So, but there's some differences here, okay? So, there's really two main troubles that people have had. The code plug is the first, and we'll talk about that. And the second one is going through a public repeater is probably the second, okay? And that has made some shifts occur that I'll talk about as well in regards to hotspots. And as I say in the last sentence there, most people seem to be using hotspots almost exclusively. Now, that said, while there are people that have hotspots in the back of their vehicle, wired up, you know, either with their phone providing the internet access or a hotspot like I'm using right now, a Wi-Fi hotspot providing the internet access. There are still people in mobile, operating mobile statewide, that are able, with the handy-talkie, to hit the repeater during commuter traffic hours. So you still will hear people who are obviously in the car that aren't necessarily using a hotspot. But those that are more like us in this club tend to have hotspots at home and in their cars, okay? Which is kind of a different sort of concept. Anyway, if you think about it.
Why do you say it's more like CD than radio?
Well,
I disagree, but
depends where you're at.
there are a few 2-meter users that are coming out of DMR, and that's where I see the CD-like behavior.
Yes. It is not inherently like CB any more than any other operating band in
That's what I thought. Okay.
in the amateur service. But what's a little different about it is, you know, if you hung around certain spots, say on the upper end of 20 meters, for example, and at a time 5-6 years ago when you could hear traffic across the U.S. pretty readily, you'd notice that certain regions of the country are a little different in how they go about a rag chew, or how they go about what the topics they choose to talk about, or just sort of their cadence and how they operate is a little different. So that's really what I'm talking about.
Okay.
That's not a Minnesota statement at all, not in the least. But there is a region of the U.S. that is particularly CB radio-like in the way that they do things, and I think always has been, really. So that's where the comment came from.
I've seen new people come on the band that call, CQ, November 0, November Kilo India, this is N0 NKI, they're calling CQ. Anybody have a copy there? Good, buddy? Almost. And it's like, your name is displaying on my radio, including your city, state, country. I can practically pull up, when you were licensed. I can see from your DMR ID how long you've been on the radio.
Yep.
I don't need your call 4 or 5 times. I don't need to call CQ. And good buddy, oh my God.
Yeah. You don't hear that to that extreme that often,
Well,
but you do.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I got you.
But you do.
But then it's also a much smaller community too. I mean, there's at least Minnesota State, there's 600 people that have ID numbers. There are 70 of us that are very active. We know each other by voice, and then
I find that to be true most of the time. So just as a recap that plays into this point, that presentation I think was about a year ago or so that we had. So you may not remember, and it was more technically oriented, which was appropriate. But TAC 310, 311, 312, but 310 in particular is USA-wide. So you may remember that the channels, the particular channels that are out there are allocated in such a way that there's a hierarchy to it, or they're used as a hierarchy. So you'll have countrywide, you'll have region, not quite as often, but you can have regions. You'll have states, those are very common. You can have local, you can have club, you can have just whatever you decide as a group that you want to have set aside a channel. So there's all kinds of different possibilities, but unlike traditional radio that's typically limited in range, like a local analog repeater would be, where you don't expect someone from France to come in and start talking back to you. DMR is a little different that way, because if you are on a worldwide, okay, or if you are on US even, that's not restricted to US. It just means that's what the coverage is through Brandmeister or through Seabridge, you know, depending on how you're connecting. So just a thing that I think some people aren't always aware of when they find a channel that they like. They hear people on, it seems active. They don't necessarily realize that they can be heard across the U.S. No.
So consider that.
Well, it has to do with it's more of a networking concept than anything. It's kind of like subnets. Okay. So Brandmeister, I didn't want to bake that into the pitch because it's almost a pitch by itself, but Brandmeister and Seabridge provide the server back end for the streaming services that are coming in. And that's essentially what you're connecting to with your internet connection. I set my Shark open spot, which I'll show you in a second, that's Eric, right? And my jumbo spot up to Brandmeister 3101, but you know, you have choices out there, and you know, you don't even have to use a US repeater, or sorry, a server, but you know, it kind of makes sense
They
to
refer
do
to
so.
those as masters. So
Yeah.
DMR is a network of networks,
Mhm.
and Seabridge is a product from Rayco Communications that is designed to expand a DMR network beyond Motorola's built-in limitations. So with Motorola, you can have up to 16 repeaters interconnected with no switching or anything, just 16 repeaters that all act as one wide area repeater. So Rayco Communications invented the Seabridge, which allowed networks to grow and buffers to mean something for switching between clusters of networks.
Yeah.
Brandmeister is a project that started outside the U.S. and the goal was to interconnect competing technologies. So Motorola has their own, the radios use an open standard on the radio side, but on the back end side, the network side, it's all proprietary.
Yeah.
Motorola requires a licensing fee to understand how their repeaters communicate with each other. And Hytera, another company, has a similar collection of radios and network equipment, and they couldn't talk to each other, and security researchers reverse engineered the protocols and figured out how to take packets from one network to the other network.
Okay.
And that's where Brandmeister came from. It was all done by hams, and they're very into experimental and homebrew, so the homebrew protocol was invented. That's where the hotspot came from, and so now it doesn't really matter what the radio is. Brandmeister wants to interconnect. The Seabridge crowd, that's the Motorola purist, where if you don't have a backlink logo on your radio, you should get off by network.
Okay.
Okay.
Kind of typical. No, that's helpful. I said chime in. So code plugs are kind of a bugger, but so here, the recommendation that I'm making, and I'll send this pitch out over the reflector, you know, as a zip file, because I know we've had some troubles downloading files off of the Google service, but basically, I think setting up a code plug from scratch is really the way to go. If you pick one up, that's fine, but it doesn't really, you really aren't ready to plug and play quite yet when you pick up a code plug. And if you know who you got it from, that's one thing. And there have been some people here in the club that have offered their code plugs to other people. And that's a little different deal, because then you have someone that can support it, if you will. But an obvious problem with something like DMR that is not open, just free to talk right from the get-go when you power up the radio, is that you can't go out and contact somebody to help you until you get set up. It's kind of a catch-22 there that everybody, you know, finds out pretty quick. So what I'm recommending here, and what this particular slide is about, is essentially saying shoot for 310 because it has a lot of traffic on it. So as soon as you get 310 set up in your code plug, then you will probably start to hear people, so that'll be the first thing. And then if you go the hotspot route, which I also recommend because it seems like everybody gets there sooner or later anyway, then you'll have a much easier time getting set up. Really, even though I've been through it, I think it kind of can reduce down to an hour, couple hour kind of thing if you start with the right parts to begin with. And Larry had spent a lot of time. I know Bob had spent time. I had spent a great deal of time. So rather than, and spending the time's fine because you learn as you go, but it's a little bit painful as you go through. Titera with their MD380 has their software to actually upload the code plug isn't too bad. So it starts you at the right place in terms of, okay, I've got a blank slate here. Now, what do I have to do to connect all this up? And that's really the only thing you kind of need to know. Say, okay, what order do I do things? Do I get the hotspot put in as a zone? Do I set a channel? Do I set a digital receive group? So on and so forth. So I'm offering in this, not going to walk through all of it, but basically just a suggested way to go about getting at least an MD380 or anything like it, online or operating as soon as possible. And then you can discover other channels like 3127 Minnesota statewide, 311, 312, 31075, 31665, all these different things that are out there across the country that are either set up as regional or we're a special interest group, I guess would be a better way to describe it. And you'll find them as you read more and more about DMR, you'll run into these channels. So, then
back up, what's this code plug? Definition of code plug.
it's essentially all it is a data set. Okay. So it's got a particular known format, and it contains, much like an HTML file would contain, the encoding of the information that's consumed over on the radio side.
So you download that into your radio then?
That's right.
Yeah, okay.
That's right. So
standard format then?
Yeah.
So the personality to it.
Correct. Correct. Now, if you've ever programmed Echolink on a radio, it's very similar.
Okay.
D-Star, sort of. So there's some similarities, there's certainly some differences, but basically what you're doing is channelizing the radio with a computer instead of doing it direct entry.
Okay.
Now, with the default MD380 code, okay, the binary that's put in there, it has limited functionality. So you can still do everything I said, but you're pretty much dependent on using that Titera program to download that in there. So you'll upload the initial config, which is just a blank slate. Then you'll save it as a starting point, and then you'll go in and put the channels in and so on and so forth, and then upload it to the TYT. Okay. Usually, what we're used to with the just analog only handy-talkies is being able to have direct frequency entry, right, from the keypad. So what a group of people have done, and I'm actually using an offshoot of it, but there's I guess Hacker would be a pretty good name. Travis Goodspeed
presented at DEF CON, of all things,
Yep.
on how weak the signing and encryption was in the firmware for these radios.
Right.
And so he demonstrated that the key could be extracted from the radio, and if you have the key, you can sign your own software.
Yeah.
And you can load it in a debugger, and you can understand what the subroutines are. When I press this button, you can see where the code jumps over here. Theoretically, you could replace this code and display some different text or speak in a different mode. What he gave as an example, the radios were designed for commercial use, and so if you're not on the right talker ID, the radio remains silent. But as a scanner, wouldn't it be nice if the radio just skipped that subroutine to decide whether to decode or not and just decode it? So he gave a demonstration on stage where if we make the radio skip that, this just became a scanner instead of a watch motor.
So that became MD380 tools, and there are other people that stepped in and provided an uploader and downloader actually. So go out to the internet, grab the latest version of MD380 tools from GitHub, apply it, all of that. So it's very easy to switch these around and to get started with that. I went a step further and put in TY MD380 tools, as I said, which was a branch off of MD380. It provides a few extra functions, and Travis, I've used his projects and work before. He will move on eventually. You know, not potentially when he gets bored, but when he feels he's done enough on it, and then he moves off to something else. And he probably has 6 different things going on at the same time. The guy's very bright. So there, and he did turn it over, if I'm not mistaken, right?
There's a team of 4 core people, and there's probably now a half dozen people that make their own flavor of it. The flavor you're using.
Yep.
And another dozen people that have packaged the different flavors to make it very easy to use for people who are not developers.
Right. Absolutely.
So I run a VM on my computer and I type GLV to get latest version. And it automatically does everything on the back end. And I plug my radio and I type flash right into it.
Well, the reason I grabbed that particular firmware set is that people, first of all, were liking it. They had a lot of good comments about it. But I like the fact, and I don't remember where the original 380 tools and TY 380 tools kind of cross over, but you can do direct entry on it. And so if, for example, I want to call up a dynamic talk group, since I'm going to go through a hotspot, I've got the connection to Brandmeister, and I put in 311, which I don't have hard-coded, but I put 311 in there, right? And I don't remember if I had to Kerchunk it or not, but basically I can pull up any talk group that I'm familiar with if I know what the number is. I don't have to necessarily have it programmed, okay? So that's great, because even if you have a core set, right, of channels, if you travel and then you discover you want to listen in on something local, or you want to listen into something that's, West Coast versus Midwest, then you can just call it up. You can put it in there and call it up. So.
Yeah, most of the radios running the TYD tools, flavor MD3 tools have that in there now.
Mm-hmm.
I have a scratch channel. I should have a scratch channel. I just override a channel. But you can go in now to radio programming, and I change the frequency to whatever the repeater is that I'm using, and then I go to the front page. I go to where talk group ID number is, and you get to know the numbers. They're logically laid out, and you just punch in the ID number. So now I took a scratch channel and put it on frequency, put it on talk group, and it's good to go.
So that has allowed this. That has brought DMR, and I think it's contributed to the popularity of it too, to a point where, at least with the MD380 and a few others that are very similar, there's Hyteras and the other popular ones that escape me right now. But there's a few handy talkies out there that can run this, and brought it to the point that makes it very, very ham friendly, right? If you've used a handy talkie before, and you probably have, an analog one, it's getting pretty close to that at this point. So
I don't own one yet, but probably everybody's heard of Anytone.
Yeah, Anytone.
Trigby from here in town has made trips over to China to meet with them.
Yeah.
That's the guy who presented to us, right?
Right, exactly.
Yeah, so Trigby went to China and said, your radio sucks in the amateur community, this is what hams want. And he's made like 3 trips over there, 4 trips now, to sit down with the developers and say, this is what you need to market.
Yeah, he told us he was going to do that, and then he would optimistically have some of those for sale, but I don't.
So he's
I think it probably took longer.
There's a lot of features. I don't own that particular radio yet. I have like 8 others that I don't get around using. But it's very, very ham friendly with direct frequency entry, time slot entry,
Yeah.
These are in 3D.
Yeah, and so at the same time, Eric's right, that's also happening with Connect Systems is the one I couldn't remember, and Anytone radios.
Samsung, Xiaomi, Merida, iTerra.
All these features are things that just didn't make sense in the commercial world, so that's why they're not there. Is that-
No, because they emulated what Motorola did, I
Yeah.
think, for the most part. And originally, if you
Which didn't need
remember
those
from
features.
Trigvy's speech, it was, well, I've got 10 techs out in trucks running all over the place, and I want to communicate with them. I don't want them communicating with each other, or I do. You know, just different ways you could set things up. And much like pocket pagers of the day or commercial FM when it was a thing, or a bigger thing, you had what started out being tone squelch, you know, ended up becoming a digital decode kind of squelch. And effectively, you were sharing the channel, even though Trigby talked about time slots and stuff. You had enough separation between commercial entities that they really didn't interfere with each other, and there was a good amount of bandwidth available for them to do it. And those commercial and the UHF band have overlapped with the ham band and the ISM part of the band that we share for a long time, and really we haven't noticed, you know. So, you know, it was a good setup, but it just wasn't ham friendly. It really wasn't, it didn't start out being an amateur radio service option, I think is fair to say. Okay, so the hotspots, there's many. Eric brought us a couple of different ones that I've heard about. This is his, this is the Shark RF, which Larry has as well. They're typically transmitting about a 10 milliwatt signal. In the case of the Shark, I have mine down in the basement, and every point in my property, no problem. Reaches back and forth, no problem. So, you know.
I have mine from 2 blocks away.
Okay.
I
Okay.
put mine on my patio in Phoenix and took a 7-mile drive up to Tower Hill where the RF is just absolutely insane to see
Yeah.
if it would work. Work beautiful.
Yeah.
Absolutely work beautiful.
Yeah. Yeah. So they're nice units. Now I was lucky enough that I had read, not heard, but read that this company is it Hungary they're out of, or?
I just imported 10 of the things.
I think it is Hungary.
Yeah. Well, regardless,
HA.
old Eastern Bloc
Yeah.
part, and they for Easter Sunday they had these on sale.
It all came from Estonia.
Estonia, okay. They had them on sale for half off.
Oh.
So I got one for $89. Typically they're $179. You got yours?
I don't want to say what I.
Well, it was,
Okay.
it was,
I paid for mine 2 weeks before Easter.
It was more than that, yeah, but shipping was a huge chunk of it.
Yeah.
That's why I brought 10 of them.
Yeah. So I'll pass that around. Please return that to Eric. So what I like about the Shark is that it's very user-friendly on its interface to set it up, and it has a whole series of documentation on their website that you can just walk through when you go through to set up the hotspot. Not super difficult. Like anything, it's new. The terminology is going to be a little bit foreign to you, but they have good examples. So I don't know. I personally didn't find it hard to set up, but
I actually found polar opposite. I found
Yeah.
that the configuration of the Shark RF was the most complicated hotspot I've touched.
yeah,
Because there's a modem configuration and
Right.
a network configuration.
Right.
There's many different modes that it supports. It's nice that it's a commercial product. It's very predictable. If you've got a Shark RF, you've got a Shark RF. It's the same as everybody's Shark RF.
yeah.
I bought it in particular because it's half price, and it has a programming interface. There's an API, so if you're a software developer and want to tinker with the network, it provides an interface for getting deep into the network in ways that aren't otherwise exposed. And it's capable of cross-mode communications
Yeah.
in the way that they've implemented it. So if you have a DC D-Star radio and you want to try DMR out today, you can configure your shark to be D-Star on the radio side and DMR on the network side.
Yeah, or
Quick
AC.
question. Does it have to be plug-in internet, or can this go to wireless?
And that is the suckiest part of it. What I see, I can't imagine that they introduced a product that is hardwired Ethernet only.
Okay.
It's really tough to have a hotspot that can't be plugged in wireless.
But that's the only one, the other ones do?
Well, then,
Pretty much.
let me
Most of
ask
the
you
others are
another
based
question.
on a Raspberry
Pretty much.
Pi.
Oh, okay.
And the rumor
you
is
have Wi-Fi
that
on those.
at Hamvention, we're gonna see the next, I think it's version 5 of the Shark with wireless.
Oh, okay.
Now, I did hear that like 2 weeks after it was introduced, and
Yeah.
that was.
Oh, I know it's been out there, yeah, oh, yeah. So, I'll address that part of it too, but, I think we covered just about all of this. You know, some of the things that you don't know that you have to think about when you're going to do a code plug, you sort of discover after the fact. So in hindsight, you start thinking, well, do I want local repeater access? Do I want, you know, one-to-one channel and receive group? Do I want a channel that is a series of channels to receive on, which is a little chaotic. I don't recommend that you have more than maybe 3 to 5. But there's a lot you could do. There's a lot of flexibility there. There's a lot of different things you can do. And I think that's part of what makes DMR radios a little bit cumbersome to deal with. There's just a lot of flexibility and not a lot of sort of, okay, do this by default. And again, with their commercial heritage, not ham-friendly particularly. So as I said earlier, I recommend going to put 310 in to walk through. If any of you are going to go through this, if you want to pick up an MD380, I would be glad to support you. I can support you via email, get you going on it, not a problem. But as I said, I'll make the presentation available. This is straightforward enough if you take a certain approach that I basically did the whole presentation on the plane back, right? Just from memory. So it's not really rocket science. It's more, you know, do I go left or do I go right here? Do I go straight? Do I do this? Do I do that? What choices do I make is really what it comes down to. And you're dying to say something.
Sure. So 2 resources that come to mind right away. I've got a website up there which is minnesotadmr.com. minnesotadmr.com.
Right.
All spelled out. There's also an mndmr.net.
Yeah.
You asked whether I was friends with Nagy, and Nagy and I have been very good friends. I thought that he was trying to control and take ownership over the DMR community. He wanted to direct the sheep, and I thought that was a terrible way to look at the user community as your sheep, and was offended by it, and so I threw the website out, and it's been in competition with Nagy.
Wait.
Well,
ever since.
yeah.
Wait, tell me
Okay.
what the 2 ones are identified.
So there's mndmr.net,
Okay.
and then there's minnesotadmr.net. Yeah, specifically .net.com, .org.
I don't remember which one I'm on.
There's a sort of a different approach to both. If you go to the mndmr.net website, you can download the user agreement and the license agreement and the terms and conditions if you want to connect the repeater up to this network and learn how you shall operate DMR. If you go to my website, you'll hear me say over and over again, I don't own the website, it belongs to our community, I'm your steward, how can I serve you? And I post anything that I hear comes to mind. And Galen and Dave maintain the default code points for people that are getting started in DMR.
Then that's
Both
what
of our
I-
websites link to a Google Drive where Dave and Galen post their stuff. I'm a huge fan of Brandmeister and open networks, experimentation, and everything else.
Yeah.
We would like to see Batwing statue on everybody's
Yeah,
desk.
now I understand the divide. I was kind of wondering what was behind it, so that was very useful. I got a call one Sunday about 2 months ago when the APRS in Medina went down, and I got called to put mine back up. Okay, now I'm over in the northwest. I don't have the coverage because I don't have a 400-foot tower to glom on a DMR or a VHF antenna to, but that caused a reaction where it opened up some holes that St. Cloud, Minneapolis couldn't fill. So I said, yeah, sure, I'll put it back online. And then mysteriously it came back. And it was DMR for a while only, and then APRS came back, and you know, I almost contacted them and said, what the hell are you doing? But, you know, teach his own.
This is Nagy who,
He's been here too.
okay.
Yeah.
He worked his way through Hennepin County outside, got access to the Medina tower at 400 feet for 2 systems. Was the APRS node and the DMR system. Never mind that emergency management already had plans for a DMR system. I was working with the community, and all of a sudden there's a DMR system on the tower, and I mean, that's what they have plans.
Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah. Yeah. I know. Yeah, so anyway, enough of the politics, but that's interesting. So I think the main reason the hotspots have become popular is the one comment I've heard a lot just in passing listening to people in QSOs is that they're not close enough to a repeater, or they didn't feel they were close enough, you know, whatever, take it for whatever it's worth kind of thing, right? They live out of ways, they don't have enough access, they didn't want to put an external antenna up, yada, yada, yada. So that's one thing. The other thing I've heard is people, I think that the experience you just described is not that unique across the country, right?
or an amateur radio, yeah.
Right. So you're going to probably tend to see 2 camps, and I think you described roughly what those 2 camps are going to tend to be. One's going to be open and welcoming, and the other one's going to be more restrictive. And so it isn't as easy sometimes when you're trying to fiddle with all this to say, okay, I've picked this repeater I'm going to go to, and then for whatever reason that you're unaware of, you can't get access to it. And what you're used to is putting on a tone, you know, a shift. It works. Peter comes back and says, you know, hey, I'm here. So I have a suspicion, and that's certainly all it is that that's been a contributing factor as well.
So you have your choice then of either the hotspot to the internet or else getting a repeater. That's
Yeah,
your choice.
that's
And
right.
what kind of range do you have on that radio to get to a repeater?
Wait, you can do both.
You definitely can.
This I can do,
Okay.
either connect to my
So
hotspot.
if you didn't have a hotspot, you try to go to the repeater, and
Yeah.
what kind of distance can you usually get to like your bill?
I can barely hit the St. Paul one from Hastings, barely.
Well, that's
So
5
there-
watts then?
What,
5 watts?
I don't know how much this has.
Yeah, it's 5 on high
Yeah.
and 2 on low.
Okay, so,
There are 28 sites on the air in Minnesota right now, and more being added.
Yep.
I believe one over my shoulder, another one in my basement, and always in mobile under construction in Minnesota. If you have a mobile radio, just like with 2 meters, you know, you're going to have incredible access with a rooftop antenna and whatnot. You have actually really good handheld coverage throughout the entire metro.
Yeah.
If you know which repeater to use, that's the other neat trick is, you know, you see Medina and it's at 400 feet and it seems to work, you know, great in Forest Lake, but for some reason we can't hit it here. It's just the weird
Yeah.
factors of being on the tower and the, you know, things like that. But the Minnetonka system is not far from here at all. Chaska's got some incredible coverage on the water tower there. There's a system at the airport, works great at the airport, oddly, works great in Richfield, but not in areas of Bloomington. I have a Bloomington system, which is side mounted and only a third of the way up the low-man tower there.
Mhm.
That's got the most obscure antenna pattern I've ever seen. Repeaters half embarrassing and impressive at the same time, if you know where to stand.
Yeah, yeah. Where I'm at in Otsego, I've never had any trouble getting all the way to St. Paul on a handy talk Okay, on UHF, yeah. Well, you know, recognize that I'm at above sea level, 980 feet above sea level, so that's not hurting anything. And a lot of what I'm going off to line of sight is lower,
Yeah.
right? Plus tower height, probably pretty close straight shot, so that helps a lot. But, you know, and on high power, right? That would be on 5 watts, not 2 watts. I run mine on 2 watts all the time because I'm hitting the hot spot. Yeah, but
If you go for a walk outside, I'd say anywhere in the metro, anywhere in the 694, 494, with the exception of maybe up in the northeast, you've got a choice of 3 repeaters.
yeah, absolutely.
You might not necessarily have your choice of which network you want to be on because there's a concentration of Brandmeister and a concentration of the
Right.
Seabridge connected systems.
Yes, absolutely.
And if you're in a building or in a house, you might just have 1 or 2 repeaters that you get from your house, and it might not be the network you want to use. The neat thing about Brandmeister is it's your network, it's your thing, it
Yep.
works. You only have to be worried about going through the wall if you want to walk in the next room.
Yeah.
You can have multiple users on the repeater at the same time, right? You just have a channel, but a time splice or something, but you can.
Yep, it's TDMA, there's 2 time slots, and literally, if he were on time slot 1 and I were on time slot 2, we're both on the same repeater, the 2 of us are on the air at the same time talking.
Just place it.
Yeah.
The radios are
But you already
putting up their
got
lips
that.
in
Yeah.
front of
But
each
there's
other.
just 2 channels now.
Yep,
2 time slots,
that way.
and
Okay.
But
4 frequency, 4 given
per
repeater.
frequency,
Right,
you
per
have 2 time
frequency.
slots, and you have practically an unlimited number of talk groups.
Right.
So the
Right.
2 of us could be on the air at the same time, but there's somebody else who also thinks they're able to monitor something, not aware that we're tying up 2 time slots, so they're not going to be able to
Yeah.
receive.
Now, it's fair to say you can get
Complexity
locked
there.
out on a public repeater a little easier than your own private hotspot, correct?
Yep. So when you key up the radio sends some synchronization packets. It basically is transmitting its color code
Mhm.
and its 24-bit address and its 24-bit destination. And those are going out as short little sync pulses. And the repeater comes on the air and begins sending a clock. And so your radio, when it's flipping out the pulses, is quickly receiving, and it's listening for the sync. If the color code matches and that talk group is available, you'll get a talk permit tone, so your radio will beep at you and say, you've got synchronization, you have the time slot, and now you're talking.
What's the time compression ratio? I mean, if I talk for 15 seconds, how much time is really transmitted?
A whole bunch of 30 millisecond chunks.
Right.
Yeah, but not enough 30 millisecond chunks to make up 15 seconds.
About 50% probably. if
Yeah.
you talk to the-
So it's about 48%.
48, okay.
And there is a window of buffer between our transmissions. And in that window is data messages and synchronization pulses to allow other radios to understand what to do. And it also accounts for the propagation delay, because if you're right next to the repeater and I'm 55 miles away from it, when my radio thinks it's time to transmit, and by the time it gets its message back and it hits the repeater, that window could slide a little bit. And the repeater is actually able to see that sliding window and give you distance information and things like that. You can actually get into really sophisticated tier 3 networks that can do geolocation like the cellular networks do based on propagation delay and
Yeah.
GPS synchronized stuff.
So in part, that's a lot of why I recommend going to the hotspot right off the
Yeah,
bat,
right.
because it makes
It's really.
a lot of that inconsequential. Okay, so, you know, if you're really into the technicals, and the last presentation got into a lot of the technicals, then that's cool. But if you definitely want to get on the air and see and get the radio working and see what DMR is about for yourself, I think it's a little easier to go to the hotspot
If
route.
your
Or,
transmit frequency and receive frequency are programmed the same, the radio goes into just a dumb stupid, I'm going to bark a data stream,
yeah,
and I'm just going to receive a data stream, and the TDMA side of clocking and all that really doesn't come into play. Your hotspot's just a transmitter around here all the time. And your handheld, while it's transmitting 50% of the time, the hotspot doesn't care where the window is. It's not sending you it can't send a time impulse.
So if you want to go out in your car, for example, then obviously you can't use your hotspot, so you might as well, then you need a repeater.
Well, a lot of people are hauling hotspots with them in their cars.
Yeah, so
You want to hook up the internet there.
You have a phone
Yeah,
or a Wi-Fi hotspot.
yeah.
And there are a lot of folks, double E, technical programmer type folks that essentially do that just as well, of course. They have an accessory plug in the back of their SUV like mine does, right? So they've got the adapters in, they got that thing on, so they've got internet access in their vehicle, and they use it for a lot of different things. They don't just use it for DMR, but, again, are you more of a hacker type, or are you more of a, I just want to talk?
You have unlimited data on your cell phone too, right?
And the bandwidth is shockingly small.
Yeah.
The data rate for this voice is 2,400 baud.
Yeah.
It's 3,600 baud with all the error correction overhead and stuff. The raw packets is like 2,400 baud. So you can have a repeater site that's connected by cellular modem. Nagi's site in Medina is literally just a cellular modem with both time slots going all the time. His data plan is using maybe 600 to 800 megs in the entire month.
Mine's a gig, and I can't use it up, not even close. And unfortunately, I have to take that in and get it replanned. But when you get the go to Best Buy, get a hotspot kind of thing, right? It's ready to go as soon as you open it up, okay? 'Cause it's got the SIM card and everything. The problem with it is they lock you into a 1 gig, and you can upgrade from there, but 1 gig no rollover.
Oh.
Okay, so it's use it, and then if you don't, you lose it. Okay, but it is possible if you have a good relationship at the AT&T store with someone, right, to get that put on as another device in your plan, but you can't do it yourself. I've tried. You can't do it yourself on the AT&T internet. Now, maybe Verizon you can, or maybe T-Mobile you can, but
I use Ting, which is on the Sprint network with the T-Mobile network, which then we get, and it costs $6 for another SIM card, and then it uses the shared data. You're paying for the data,
Right.
Data is so cheap that,
Yeah.
it's
That's nice to know, it's not just hogging it up. I mean, Google Maps takes a lot more than that.
Oh, yeah.
way more. Google Maps on a 10-minute drive will use as much data as a hotspot will.
Interesting.
Yep.
So
Yep.
we run with that too.
So very efficient.
Yeah, very nice.
I have a question.
Yeah.
Would DMR work with the factory hotspot? The car I have, it's got a hotspot.
Yeah, you just have to set up the DMR hotspot, okay, with that Wi-Fi connection, and you're good to go. Right, so you essentially have 3 components: the DMR radio, the internet router, or DMR hotspot in between, and then some access to Wi-Fi is the 3rd component. So if you have it in your car,
It's a hotspot for your hotspot.
yeah. Yeah, the hotspot's an overloaded term. It's a dual-use term. It basically means that you've got wireless access. Now, in one case, it's UHF, ham band, DMR. In the other case, it's 2.4 gigahertz Wi-Fi. Okay, so the 2 very different things, completely different things. But we call them both hotspots. The Shark. One last thing on this slide. The Shark has really been popular because it supports Yaesu System Fusion radios, D-Star radios, NXDN is on Jumbo Spot, but P25 and of course DMR are on here. So you have a great deal of coverage as far as handhelds go. A lot of folks were on Yaesu System Fusion or D-Star first before they got into DMR. Those radios tend to be more expensive, so when they added that hotspot, they gained something, they didn't really lose something. So the other thing is that will allow bridging between, I haven't tried it yet, so I don't know a lot about it, but Yaesu System Fusion chat rooms and your DMR radio.
P25 I can't make work,
Yeah,
and P25 does not work on the original MMDVM
okay.
modem device, but
Okay.
Supposedly works on the jumbo spot or zone spot,
Yeah.
which is what I was building. I was going to demonstrate
Yeah.
P25
Okay.
bridging
Okay.
only to get the radio.
Yeah.
P25 is not a very popular mode.
Now that was standard communication, or was it Motorola that?
P25?
Yeah.
That was Motorola's solution to public safety
Okay.
use. So it's-
Okay.
there's phase 1 and there's phase 2. It's very, very similar to DMR Tier 3. There's a lot of control for geolocation and remotely directing radios.
And it's trunked or not?
Yeah.
It is
Well, it
trunked.
could be both.
Okay.
And there's a conventional analog version as well.
Okay. Okay. Well, so anyway, that's a selling point of these two hotspots, is that they're multi-mode. And so if you already had the other D-Star Yaesu System Fusion, then you can use the same hotspot with them. If you don't and you want to buy one, then you can do that as well. I don't know, collectively I think between D-Star Yaesu and DMR, I don't know what, just anybody's best guess, but you got probably over half of the ham radio community has at least one or more of those modes that they're using. So it's, digital is definitely here to stay. I don't know if something else comes along, maybe it'll replace it, but it's certainly very popular right now.
For DMR user IDs that are registered, everybody registers for an ID number.
Through DMR.
At the beginning of the year, we were passing 40-something thousand
Yeah.
users,
Yeah.
and this morning I loaded 93,000.
Yeah.
200 and something.
Whoa.
Yeah, this year has been real strong growth.
So it's just exponentially skyrocketing.
Yeah. Yeah, I got the first three numbers of my ID are 312, and it wasn't these couple weeks they were up to like 315, 316. Just kept climbing.
Yeah, the newest users in the Twin Cities are in the 600s, 600s, maybe even past 700s this year.
Yeah. Wow. All right, now, so I'll cover the interfaces here quickly with the two brands of hotspots. I use the jumbo spot, which is sitting back there. It's what this radio is connected to currently. I set up a zone for the Shark, I set up a zone for the jumbo spot, and a zone for the local repeater channels. So,
Another one I pass around.
yeah, thank you. It's a very small device. It sits as a piggyback card on a Pi Zero, and the Pi Zero W with the wireless version is pretty much replaced the original Pi Zero. So you have, when you put these two together, you now have your wireless Wi-Fi connected hotspot for DMR, and that's why I use it for travel.
Pi Zero is the newest after Pi 3 even now?
No,
It's a
Zero
miniature-
came out in between,
It's a
but
miniature, I thought. Right?
yeah, it's the little one that's,
There's
yeah,
a new Pi 3 that's even newer than the
B
Pi 2.
plus.
So there's a Pi 3 that's old and the Pi 3 that's new.
right, right. The B plus just came out, and the Zero W preceded it, I think end of last year, maybe last fall,
But
something
it's
like
a whole
that.
new simple functionality in the first thing over
It's just a little bit kneecapped compared to like a Pi 3, okay? But it's not down where the original Pi is either, or even the Pi 2. So it's pretty powerful.
So that's full Linux and everything? Oh,
Yep,
okay.
yep. And it's running full Linux and Pi Star as an application on top of that. That's the user interface.
So that's a Pi 3, that's a Pi 0.
So that's the user interface that you see with Pi Star.
Very cool.
You enable the modes, and then they show up as green. You see system status, shows up as green. You set your transmit and receive. On the jumbo spot, it's got an oddity in that it has to have a 500 hertz shift, but they warn you about that. So essentially, you program the radio, in my case 439.6, and then you put the shift in. The repeater is going to be your DMR ID. It's going to be time slot 2. The Shark, I think, is also time slot 2.
Yep, 1, 2 is generally where they are.
For hotspots.
The radio and the hotspot really don't care, but 2 is used for consistency.
Yeah.
Yeah. Jump into politics just a little bit, and that 500 kilohertz correction that's in there.
Cool.
So the this little board that fits on the Pi Zero was an open source project that was shared on GitHub. Another electronics enthusiast like ourselves used this standard implementation to create a radio that's a TI chipset that's in there for a sub 1 gig
Yeah.
radio.
For the
Anyhow,
radio
he
chipset,
shared the design online with a Creative Commons non-commercial attribution required license, and then went on to reiterate absolutely no commercial use. If you want to make these for friends, let me know about it. And somebody in China said, you can really make some money if we make these in bulk. And that's where the jumbo spot came from. It's a ripoff on this guy's open source project.
Yep.
He's a little sore about it and has been sort of mentioning that if you want to be an appliance operator and buy shit from China, you kind of piss me off because you're creating a market for this. But he'd love to see groups like this, buy all the parts and sit down and assemble the thing.
Yeah.
I've done the cost analysis on it, and it's still cheaper to buy it from China.
Oh, yeah,
I don't know how they could make money because it would cost me, $33 if I had the PCB boards, and I can buy one for $34.
Yeah, and they've dropped in price too. Right now they're $59. They were a little higher when I started to get an interest in this, but they've dropped down to $59. So they're pretty cheap.
I think you can get them even cheaper than that, but one of the downsides to sourcing the way China sources is that I would imagine the TI chip is a clone, and the frequency stability is not really there. And so they produced a lot that really were way off and non-functional. So now they're testing them, and they're putting a sticker on the bottom of what the frequency correction factor is.
Right.
It's a really nice design, but the Chinese ripoff is...
It certainly does not live up to the performance you get on the Shark. No way, shape, or form. The Shark seems as good as a repeater, a public repeater. The jumbo spot is okay. You'll see loss, you'll hear dropouts, people go away, don't come back. So it's not perfect, but
I've not had that experience, but then,
well, it's luck of the
one
draw.
unit's more accurate than another. And
Yeah, it's...
How cold was your room, and
Yep.
is your temperature stable?
And just enjoying the beautiful weather here before.
So just listen to a conversation for a
Super hot
second.
down here. You can't go outside. You burn up. But no, I don't have any little ones. But I do have a little one, but they live someplace else. My little ones are now
That's definitely
adults.
clear.
So
Cool.
they're
Complete
on
quiet.
more or less. Well, we get to see them. They're close by.
The technology uses a proprietary codec called ANDE2+. It's designed to reproduce voice frequencies. It's how they get the bandwidth down to such a narrow amount. It does create kind of a nasally reproduction of some voices.
A little bit.
It's generally pretty good, but it's a highly optimized codec for digitizing.
The most common difference I see between the two hotspots is that with the jumbo spot, and I don't think it's the brand Meister, I don't think it's the Wi-Fi connection, but it could be. I mean, it's the symbol rate that it's running at, it's probably not the Wi-Fi, but you will get syllable repetition. So you'll get 3 or 4 of the same syllables that just repeat in a stream. And I don't get it on the Shark, but I do get it on the jumbo spot. So I'm kind of thinking it's the hotspot. Have you ever experienced that on the repeater, or?
When I do, it's can be explained as interference in the DMR generally. So there's forward error correction that I think is handled better by the repeater, probably by the jumbo spot, versus the shark, whereas the jumbo spot is probably just carving packets off uncorrected. So if they come in the network with errors and then they go out, they're going to go out with errors. Whereas the repeaters and the shark probably are processing the error correction and sending out corrected audio. So when you double up your errors and you stack errors, you have the...
So my bottom line conclusion of that with these two, and I know there's other things out there, there's other kinds of hotspots out there, but my experience with these two is that you get what you pay for. It's fair to say because of your lower cost of entry with the jumbo spot, even though it's a little more portable with the Wi-Fi access, you're getting what you pay for. So my cost of entry with the whole shooting match, using the hotel Wi-Fi, right, with the travel router, which we'll talk about here in a minute, was the cost of the radio, the hotspot, the travel router, all told, looking at about $200. With the Shark, you're going to have, with the radio, a wired connection, but for home use, that's fine in most cases, and you're in for a little more than that, okay, but not considerably. And the Easter sale that they had was a pretty big success because it was, as I mentioned, half off. So you paid $89, let's say, for the radio, you paid $89 for the hotspot, and pretty much had what you needed at that point.
Yeah, they were $143 with Minnesota sales tax paid and the shipping divided amongst 10 people and the Easter sale. I think maybe the numbers you're talking about were in euros.
No, it was just over $100, but with the shipping and all that, and that kind of surprised me because it came DHL and it showed up in like 4 days.
Yeah.
So, maybe 120, something like that for one of them. But anyway, good deal. As you noticed on the jumbo spot, the high star screen, both of them through their web interface show you the information because for a variety of reasons you may not get it if you're at home or if you have a laptop or a tablet in front of you. You can see a little more information about who was last heard and what's going on, and then also across other channels as well. The travel router, the background on this is when I first started traveling, I have a number of these devices that allow Ethernet to Wi-Fi bridging and routing functions with the DDWRT version of Linux or build of it. So there's a lot of things that you can do, but one of the things that's a little more difficult is to bridge Wi-Fi to Wi-Fi, and specifically hotel Wi-Fi, because you have to sign in initially unless you have something that will cache it. And that does all this. In short, this guy will go Ethernet in, Wi-Fi out, it will go Wi-Fi to Wi-Fi, Wi-Fi to wired. It's essentially got everything covered. It also is DDWRT, but it has some modules that I didn't take the time to hunt down to put into that device to get it to work. But got a great user interface. You just go in, you find the access point by SSID that you want to connect to, and you have a bunch of options as far as whether you do pass-through authentication, which is what you would do in a hotel, or whether or not you just have a password that you put in. So in Marriott, once you're in, you opt in, you're good for the week typically, and you don't have to sign back in again. So I just leave the hotspot there alive anyway the whole time I'm there. I turn the hotspot, the DMR hotspot back on, the radio, boom, it's essentially ready. But you can run a Roku off of this without which is hard to do in a hotel because of the sign-in that you have to do. So this eliminates that, you know, on all your devices. And then the only other thing I did is I thought to make it the same SSID out that I have at home. So all the devices I had already set up to use at home work with this, right? So that SSID is active in the hotel room because I'm not home, and vice versa. So I never have to futz with the devices to get them, you know, to work. So that's just a kind of a common sense trick. These are about $29.
Oh, really?
So pretty cheap, very reliable.
Something new on the Raspberry Pi based units with the latest Pi Star. If they boot up and they can't find your Wi-Fi in a minute, they become a hotspot.
Mm-hmm.
And then you can go in and connect to a network and
Okay.
create a relay network as well. So you have your personal
Now, is that
devices
like
connected
Debian
with this.
10?
What's that?
Is that like Debian 10 or 9 or
That was the
11?
Pi Star distribution, the version that came out.
Oh, okay.
Or whatever.
I got you. Okay. Yeah. My fault, yeah. So, like I said, I'll send this deck out so you guys can look at it. Bob, who couldn't be here today, I sent the information to him so he could get going because he travels once in a while and he wanted to be able to take his DMR hotspot with him. So that's the key to that.
Even if you're not interested in DMR, that's a good device to have with you when
Oh,
you're
absolutely,
traveling.
absolutely.
A lot of hotels, you know, you can connect 2 or 3 devices, and then that's it, and they don't let you connect between the devices. If you have something like that with you connected to the network,
You
now
have your
can
own
talk
network.
between your devices, you have your own network.
Yeah, it's just like being at home. So, yeah, definitely good money investment.
You can set them up to do VPN. I have
I
that.
do,
Yeah.
so and literally, at home means at home, so like, when I'm in a hotel, it's exactly the same, I'm browsing my network and watching my webcam and seeing things that are on the internet.
Yeah. So last thing I wanted to cover is just some operating things, and only because of a couple observations I made. It can be very frustrating depending on how you're accessing DMR, how you're going to interact on that channel. It can be frustrating if you get locked out. It can be frustrating, equally frustrating, if people from normal amateur radio operation, I want to say this, habits, essentially, key up quick. And keying up quick on DMR on a USA-wide channel like TAC 310, not the best idea. So if you just count to 3, count to 5, something like that before you key up, and you'll notice as you listen that there are people that are waiting that little pause. Some more than others, but you have that pause in there, and then someone can come in and ask for a radio check because they've just got things where they think is working. They can get in. But, you know, again, it's a USA-wide. I'm using it as an example because you've got people coming in from all over and out of the country. It's not, surprisingly, it's not that busy, but at the same time, you want to be courteous and give people a chance. And as such, you're not going to have hour-long QSOs typically. Now, there is a way to do that, and you can go peer-to-peer, or you can go from DMR unit to DMR unit through like Brandmeister, or you can essentially QS-wide to another open channel. But that you'll notice with DMR is that it tends not to be long QSOs. There are nets, and people chime in on the net, and they go through, they say a few things, and then they're gone. So just like typical analog FM, there are nets out there, and there are club-ish kind of groups that get together. People who know each other on a first-name basis, that don't live near each other, that have just gotten used to talking to each other. Like any mode, there are people who are pretty much next to their radios, you know, all day, or close to all day. So you can call certain people, like 86 USA, and the guy's going to be there. So on 310 anyway. So I mean, you just get to know the people that are on the air quite a lot. But everybody, there's no agreement per se or any formalization that I know of. I don't think the ARRL has commented on DMR in any way to say here's kind of what the guidelines should be. It seems to me to be self-organizing and self-regulated at this point. Is that fair?
Yeah, it's a network of networks, and, you know, I, for example, has his way he'd like to see his network run, and I have my way of letting anything go. And so I don't think you'll ever find consensus on DMR. Everybody's connected to everybody, but you won't find that everybody operates the same way.
I'm not a DMR user, but correct me in my thinking on this, is that one of the nice things about the hotspot is let's say you can connect up to a repeater. But, for example, let's say they carry 10 top groups, and the one that you want isn't on there. By having your own hotspot, you can then...
You have access to everything.
You can select what you want, and the cool thing about that is you're not tying up anybody else's resources while you're doing this. So, I mean, it is your private little repeater, and the world is your oyster right there.
Right, and I think maybe the way, too, to think about it is, yes, it's time division multiplex between the radio and the hotspot, but on the back end of the network, there's a lot of multiplexing going on as well. So you very much can have many more people able to come in on a particular channel.
Do you have internet on your laptop right there right now?
Yes.
You should just pull up hose.brainmeister.com.
No, that's okay. Yeah, what he's referring to is that Brandmeister has a hose line, which essentially what it is you can bring up different channels. So you'll go to hose.brandmeister.com, I think it's .com or
It's
.net.
a worldwide DMR dashboard.
Slash, and then the channel, right? So you go /310 or /3175
If you
or
want to
whatever.
monitor a particular topic, but just in general, as a dashboard, there's a global map that will turn red if there's someone in that country that's speaking on DMR, and it'll flood a list. Each user ID, what they're talking to, how long they talk for.
Yep.
It's the global map of activity on the network.
Because all the traffic comes through it. Culvert.
But it's true that there's also the ability to tune a particular talk group, so if you want to monitor the radio from the web page, you can do that. And there was, and sort of is, an archiving where the messages are recorded. You can go back and listen to the radio from last month, or maybe you couldn't attend the net, you were in a meeting or something, you can go back and listen to the net.
Do most repeaters allow you to pull up most talk groups, or is there kind of a structure around
That's
that?
one of the big differences
Hotspots allows
between,
anything.
so the C-Bridge, the radio communications license thing where they've got a table and roll up feed for every link that goes into it, is manually built. Everything that's going to talk to every path has to be built through it. Probably get a certification and spend months learning how C-Bridge operates. And most people won't have exposure to C-Bridges, so it's a complicated beast. Brandmeister pretty much says, if you can come up with a 24-bit address, we'll route it, and everybody does everything. And so every Brandmeister connected repeater has access to every 16 billion addresses available in the 24-bit address space, or whatever it is.
Yeah, it's you know, on a lower bandwidth, higher latency connection, I find that hose is just, it's too much. It's hard to listen in, and it's hard to.
But even if it's a dashboard, you can see
Yeah.
globally the activity on DMR.
Yeah, which is like, boom, 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 boom. I mean, it's nuts.
It's also kind of interesting, there are some talk groups that are configured statically on a lot of repeaters. It's possible from your hotspot, if you key up on talk group number 1 for worldwide, your act of pushing the PTT button might bring up 1,600 repeaters for overloading because you push the button.
Yeah.
I mean, you could count the number of watts, you know,
Oh, you've got
kilowatts
it.
of global warming because you key the button.
All right, but I have a question. Suppose right now my radio is on channel 3, which is, Minnesota.
Channel 3 is just a position on the dial. If
Wow.
you were on Minnesota State on a particular repeater or hotspot.
3127.
All right, number 4, it says Minnesota State.
Yep.
Okay, suppose, let's see, how was I gonna say this? Oh yeah, okay. Suppose I'm talking to you on that Minnesota State one, and we are on 2 different repeaters, but okay, they get connected, it travels through the internet, blah, blah, blah. Okay, then we quit talking, and there's, or maybe a third person jumps in, but I decide to back out and let the 2 of you continue talking. All right, but at the same time, I know of a talk group, let's say, that is in an area in California where a friend of mine lives.
Yep.
Okay, so I flip over to that talk group in California. Suppose it's busy, in use out there. Will I immediately hear somebody talking, or do I have
Yeah,
to
you will.
first key up to get the repeater to connect to it?
It depends on the network and how you're connected.
Yeah.
Most PTT-based talk groups are not feeding any data to the repeater until after you've Kerchunked once.
What?
Yeah.
And the Kerchunk isn't passed on as a transmission. So literally, you can key up and go blah, 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 blah. I'm talking to myself right now, and you are literally talking to yourself because the network is not going to forward any packets until you unkey. That Kerchunk created the path. Now the next time you key up, that will go over the air. But something to be aware of, when you do the Kerchunk, which opens the pipe,
Right.
you're not going to be immediately fed the transmission that's in progress. You're only going to be fed the next time somebody keys up
Right.
through. So it's possible you get 2 long-winded people, each of them transmitting to the timeout timer 120 seconds. You could do a Kerchunk because you want to get on California
Yeah.
and listen and not hear anything for 2 minutes.
Right.
So literally, what's the 2-minute knockout timer? When you key up, you might pop up in the middle of a queue of 2 super long-winded people. So when you're chunking a talk group, you bring it to you on that network and repeater, you want to monitor for
Right.
a duration that exceeds most long-winded hands.
Yeah. Now, you
Okay.
can tell on your device, depending on the firmware you have, like with the MD380 tools, it'll tell you that there's a conversation going, even if you're not looking at a dashboard. But hotspots don't require a Kerchunk, even though a lot of people do it anyway. So the hotspot will allow you to do what you were asking about, right? You turn the radio on, boom, there's a conversation going, you're going to hear it as soon as
Oh,
the radio
really?
boots up.
Okay, all right,
You can
now,
actually.
taking that scenario
It
once,
can. The way the routing takes place on the back end, there wouldn't be anything fed to the hotspot. It wouldn't be aware that somebody's got to key up before it starts streaming to your hotspot.
yeah, right.
Yeah, it does on mine.
It'd be at the start of the next person's transmitting.
Okay,
Yeah, no.
what if?
Might be a feature of the TYMD380 tools, I don't know. But all I do is turn it on. If there's someone on, it immediately is.
I'm going based on my knowledge of the source code.
Yeah, I know.
The network, so.
Yeah.
All right, take that scenario one step further. Suppose you 2 guys are still talking local Minnesota. I have dialed over to that California one, I Kerchunked it, but there's a long-winded guy up there, I'm waiting, a minute, minute and a half, 2 minutes for him to time out or quit or something like that. But what if, in the meantime, Jeremy dials up a repeater in Florida, and he doesn't hear anything, of course, and he has the same Kerchunk. Now,
There's a couple of things there.
I've lost
So-
my pipe that I'm waiting for to California.
Nope,
No?
or yes, depending on the network.
Yeah.
So Craig and I are on Minnesota State on
Right.
the Minnetonka repeater, which is now on time slot number 1.
Right,
And you want to Kerchunk on California. You need to do it on time slot 2.
Right.
Try to do it on time slot 1, you're going to get launched.
right,
So you're on time slot 2, we're over here on time slot 1, and you try to go to Florida.
Right.
On time
Jeremy.
slot 2. Jeremy. Is trying to get to Florida, you're trying to get to California.
yeah,
On a Brandmeister network, no one's blocking anybody. Your key up is not going to interfere with his key up. Both of you have Kerchunk, and both
Yeah.
talk groups are being fed on time slot 2 now. The next transmission that comes out of the repeater is going to be the next person who begins transmitting on any one of those talk groups.
in either California or Florida?
Either one, whichever one gets there first is the
Yeah.
one that's going to kind of own that time slot. Now, on a C-bridge network, this could be a plus or a negative. If you were to Kerchunk, say, they don't support California, but let's say you were to Kerchunk a supported talk group,
Yeah,
you have an exclusive hold on that time slot, blocking anybody from doing anything on that time slot until your exclusive hold times out. And this can confuse somebody who has loaded their code plug and is trying to figure it out. They go to TAC 310 to see that it works. And hallelujah, I just had a conversation. Let's switch over to Minnesota State, and I'll try to call up my buddy, and now it doesn't work. And you're trying to figure out if it's your programmer you're with. It's the C-bridge putting an exclusive hold. Only TAC 310 can be used until the timeout expires. It's the difference between networks. On Brandmeister, you can spin the dial and love that talk group or that time slot with talk groups. On a C-bridge, the way it's configured here in Minnesota, the first guy in sort of owns that repeater until the timer comes.
well, how would I determine whether I'm on the Seabridge or Brandmeister?
You need to know a little bit about the network.
What you're connecting to.
So
Oh.
if
but
you're
then-
on a hotspot,
If
you're
I'm-
absolutely on Brandmeister because
Right.
Brandmeister is open to supporting new innovative things like hotspots. If you're, on, you have to know, I guess.
A Motorola repeater that someone set up restrictive and has a back end for C-bridge, then
Now, I like the Motorola repeaters. I've got some homebrews and I've got the Motorola's. They all can be run on Brandmeister. But there's a handful of repeaters in town that are connected to a C-bridge in very
Oh.
yeah,
Oh, so it's the repeater owner that has made the choice.
yeah.
Okay,
It's repeater
Or in the
configuration.
case of Minnesota, if you're a repeater owner, you may have made the choice to delegate that choice. So if you connect to Nagi's C-bridge, Nagi gets to say how your repeater operates.
So let's say you two are having the conversation on the state net on say the Minnetonka repeater, and Paul is participating from another repeater, and that tied up to talk group 1, and then did his thing to bring up talk group 2. If that Minnesota was dynamic on that repeater, how long would that keep sending out over the RF on that side before it timed out and kind of went back to
The
idle?
Brandmeister network is to forward packets for 15 minutes.
15, okay. Does it do any detection, like if it saw Paul was the only user on that, and it wouldn't be able to optimize and say, oh,
No.
we know the user, okay,
The repeaters are incredibly stupid.
okay.
Incredibly stupid. You can invent talk group ID numbers and key up on them, and the repeater does that thing locally. It just works. It's a dumb box that takes packets in and pushes packets out. It pushes part of the packets on an RF side, it pushes the other part of the packets to its controller over bridge.
Are the hotspots any more intelligent, or can you effectively lock up your RF time on that?
The hotspots can be a lot more.
Okay.
I was going to say, in practice, with a hotspot at least, I hear your concerns, but it's way simpler than it sounds.
yeah,
You pretty much turn it on, dial in, you hear somebody, you wait for a break, you come in and ask for a radio check, or you just call someone directly that's on there. You're going to get them most of the time. Again, that varies by how you're connected, but typically on a hotspot, DMR hotspot, it's pretty easy, and people are pretty responsive to break-ins. Don't say break, but coming in with your call sign and to another person that's on there directly that you just picked, not a problem. So it sounds worse than it is in practice, and it's not so busy yet that it's become a challenge, at least through a hotspot. My opinion, but it'll probably get there though.
It's nice that in DMR, when you break, you can literally just even say break, and you communicate so much more information by the
Oh, yeah.
by the DMR.
Oh, yeah.
We know who you are and what's in the state you're in, possibly, depending
Yeah.
on the display of the.
I think some hams are put off by that because it didn't really come from CB, but it's sort of associated unfairly to it. I haven't heard anybody care about it though, at least in practice. People come in and say break, and some people don't. So, point well taken. Teach your own. Whatever you want to do.
Not breaker.
Yeah.
But yeah, breaker,
Big difference.
Yeah.
good thing, better leave.
Yeah. But anyway, all right. So I have some links in here, some pricing when I put this together. So you can get out there and take a look at these things, including the travel router. And I'll send it out on the reflector, as I said.
Good. I use the board called the DB Mega. That's the larger one that's on
Yeah.
here. Those are, about 429 also?
Yeah.
By the pie.
Simplex version or the duplex version?
There isn't a duplex version of the DB.
Which is the one that's duplex? Is
There
that an
There's a
MMDBM?
new duplex one that's only a couple of months old. It's
Yeah.
barely that, and it was designed by a gentleman in China who's basing it on the Zum Spot, which is, so the
Oh,
Jumbo
that's right.
Spot is a ripoff of the Zum
Right,
Spot.
right. He put
And
another
the
radio
dual
chip
band
on there.
one basically takes
Yeah.
the Jumbo Spot radios and splits them, so now you've got
Yeah.
two separate radios
Right.
to configure. And theoretically, it can do it's basically a repeater, so you can have both time slots active. But you've got
Yeah.
one full
Yeah.
radios, it's everything that a repeater does. Other than you put two radios 4 millimeters away from each other, with isolation is real great. It's
Mhm.
almost no point in putting a duplex around it. It's not a repeater. but
That's
it's-
one thing I've
it'll work in a
noticed
room.
with the radios, if you're at a desk and you're setting this up, that if the radio is within inches of the jumbo spot, not so much with the shark, but the jumbo spot, it will not work right. It has to have some distance. So,
Depends on the radio. The
Yeah.
TYT radio, the preamp that's in the RF section is the gain's too high, and it's subject to intermod and overdriving, which
Yeah.
makes the disorder stumble.
right. Yeah.
You did it up
There's
just as
mods
it
on
fades
one
away.
where you can actually take it apart and swap out a couple caps, a couple resistors, and put the gain back to
Normal.
the reference implementation and avoiding intermod problems.
Yeah.
Not that you hear intermod, it's pure digital. If it doesn't decode, it's not going to decode.
No, it just doesn't work right. It doesn't receive, it's what it tends to do. Or it will receive once in a while, but not other times. So it's just, when it's on overload, it's blocked. So anyway, yeah, so any other questions?
One of the interesting things Eric was telling me about was the modifications in some of the portables where they've gone in and they've basically figured out the code. They said, okay, this is all the Chinese character set stuff and all this other stuff, but if we get rid of it, we have all this space now for more information. And so what's happening is because so many people are becoming involved with DMR, you're able to load up all the information.
Yeah, that's the contact list problem.
Exactly. I
Yeah.
thought it was humorous that for radios no longer.
Yeah, it doesn't have a lot of leftover flash, the TYT specifically, so they did that. You reflash it, it only has the US character set. I think it can fit 95 million entries, 96 million, something like that. But we're already up there, so there's new radios that are coming out with more flash.
There's actually, in the UHF version of the radio, but not the VHF version, the UHF version can serve the Chinese marketplace, and they had envisioned not only the Chinese character set that shipped in the radio, but also possibly doing voice recording. So there's the 16 megs worth of space in the UHF version of the radio, not the VHF version of the radio. The NV3 tools hack exposes that 16 meg flash chip for a database of users.
Yep.
And the tools allow you to load not just the person's call sign to match the ID number, but their nickname, their full name, their
Right.
country, city, state, whatever you want to throw in there.
Yeah.
Um,
Which is
and
nice because you don't necessarily have to be monitoring the hotspot webpage.
Right now, we've got over 93,000 entries that are in there, and we're using
Million?
about 2 megs, and it's a 16 meg chip. And we don't necessarily need everybody's city, place of birth.
No,
nickname,
okay.
and so I think when we have this problem of hitting the,
Sarah just did it. I turned it on, or in the mid-conversation.
that's different. Your hotspot was streaming that the whole time. So when
Yeah.
you turned your radio on,
Right.
your radio just started decoding.
Right.
That's normal.
Yeah.
But if you could chunk a talk group,
Yeah,
and there's a conversation in progress,
yeah,
you won't hear it until the next
Right.
transmission comes.
Right.
Because your hotspot isn't aware that
Agree.
the bridge is
agreed,
descending.
right. Right. It's just an artifact of being on 310 by default when I power up, but there being traffic there.
How is it you ended up on 310? I mean, why,
Why 310 versus?
yeah, why 310 versus any of the other?
Actually, I talk more on 31,665 and 31,075.
Do you want
But
to
I-
know about the numbers in particular, or why he chose that talk group?
Well, I chose Minnesota State, MN State or MNDMR. And
Yeah, but I don't like talking to you guys. I'm out in California, you know,
What is 310? What is it?
USA.
Okay.
So the numbering that's used on DMR is based on the mobile country code identifier for the GSM cellular network dating way back. So if you get into the programming on your cell phone, or you go into the cell phone information, you'll see that here in the United States,
It's 310.
310 is the NCC for the GSM mobile network. The 31 is the indicator that it's North America, and US being the US. We took 310, 310, 311, 312, 313, 314, 315, and 316 before we started sharing it. And if you look at the states, 3127, we're the 27th state if you were to authorize the census. Iowa, 3119, well, I just report Arizona, I know is the 4th state, 3104. So you can find those ID numbers, and there's kind of a convention. So here in the Metro now, on all the Brandmeister connected systems in Minnesota, our equivalent, the local 2 is 3127 for the Minnesota, with 2 on the end, so 31272 is the Metro talk group. 3127 is the state talk group. 310 is the UG for the U.S. folks. 3 is the North American talk group. 1 is the worldwide talk group.
Okay, here's a question now. We always talk about emergency communications and how the common emergency communications are gonna wanna be, you went to a site with power down and everything down, you wanna be able to have enough juice or whatever to get to someplace, to get to the internet, to be able to put on a list or whatever.
Yep.
Now, it sounds like this is more useful than a crossband repeater or anything else. I mean, because you have the instant connection to the internet already, once you get it. Is that true? Has this been thought about a lot for that kind of?
Assuming the internet is not shot down
Well,
because of,
so that's why you
But
might have
yeah.
you might have to broadcast 20 miles or something to get to a repeater,
And there,
right? I mean, from a mobile radio, that's very doable yet. Right?
there's other things that people are playing with that would mitigate something like an EMP. But normal disaster kind of stuff, you're 100% correct.
Yeah.
so my
But they're usually
tinkering
regional,
around,
right? I mean, they're,
Weather,
yeah.
weather related, yeah.
Right.
my tinkering around and wanting to bring a P25 radio to show off, public safety is using P25, FEMA,
Oh, they are.
all that stuff is P25.
Oh.
And it's simplex.
Post 9/11.
Why did they standardize on that if it's inferior?
Well, it's not that it's
Oh.
inferior,
Motorola.
it's just,
Huh?
it's Motorola. You know, if you look, a lot of these Motorola radios, like the APX 4000, APX 8000, APX 9000, these are the common radios that the cops are carrying on their belt. The joke is that the model number equals the price. Each office is get a $9,000 radio.
What?
Yeah.
$9,000?
Well, it's a digital trunking
I've been
radio.
experimenting with
Spread spectrum.
interoperability where down the road, all shit hits the fan, I want to be able to bring a hotspot,
Yeah.
throw it in a squad car, and put yourself on the simplex channels. You can talk to my hotspot, we'll put you on the DMR network, now you've got global access.
Right.
FEMA Region 5, Michigan, Illinois, Wisconsin, Minnesota, I can't remember what else in Region 5. There's specialty talk groups for things like disaster coordination.
Oh, yeah.
Um,
Yeah, absolutely.
Net control operator during the flooding, hurricanes and all that stuff. There were a lot of net control operators that were volunteering, out of Montana. They were on net control on Florida.
Oh,
State.
yeah. Yeah.
There's just stuff like that that is simple to do on DMR.
But I think the interoperability that we're talking about was a plus.
Yeah,
you know?
you bet, you bet.
Public safety is a big thing for DMR right now. And there's another political difference between the NIDE camp and the non-NIDE camp. Brandmeister is a global network with 50-something masters that's at a really high state of reliability. I don't imagine that network's going to fail. NIDE, on the other hand, doesn't want there to be any external dependencies. He thought it was really important to own his own sea bridge here in the state that's closed down without the possibility of external interference. Both of us have public safety in mind in the way we designed our network. He's got his diehard solid reasons for setting policy and standard and having his own gear. I've got my reasons for interoperability and global communication. But it's interesting how much of a factor it plays in how we build our networks. And somewhat the decisiveness.
Yeah, it should.
I think they found out in 9/11 when the police and the fire department couldn't talk to
That's
each other
right.
and all that, all the messes that. All of a sudden, interoperability became the buzzword and said, we gotta have that.
Well, I
Come
think
on,
that's what happened is Motorola stepped in and they have had GSA contracts. They've been one of the 2 or 3
well,
prime
it came from that,
suppliers, and
Motorola interoperability, my opinion of Motorola interoperability is everybody buys Motorola.
that's right.
That's what it sounds like.
Yeah.
It's active, it's very active.
Well, IBM,
For $9,000, you get a pretty nice radio.
well, I
Yeah.
bet, I hope so.
IBM and other companies have been the same way, right?
Yeah.
You know, Apple, less so now, but originally, if you want reliability, if you want things to work,
Do it their way and
do it their way. Yeah.
iTunes and all that.
In my office, they used to say nobody ever got fired for buying IBM, but that guy's not here anymore.
Huh? Get fired.
Yep.
Well, this is a very interesting.
It's,
Go get one, Craig.
I know, it sounds like I need to.
I think if enough of us do, we should find a place to camp out so we
Yeah,
have
yeah.
a way to talk to each other as a club. And that's what's been happening more and more, I've seen. And,
I would love that.
yeah, because, again, we could,
That 40 meters radio that we were talking about for another reason, but.
well, a lot of us could get on 10, let's say, and just do local. But the point, I think, is that it's a new thing, and it's.
People, they can get out and talk about something that's going on and.
And I had in mind, Dan wasn't here, but there are a couple people that are in apartments that have been looking for ways to get on,
This place is
and
perfect for birds. Well, of course, birds. You do CW on DMR? Let them know what a microphone looks like.
I think he might find a way, He could be a pioneer.
When he gets to his apartment,
Menus at CW.
Yeah.
when he gets to his apartment, he's gonna have new problems,
No, that's right,
What
but-
does he do? And so,
But we have a couple members that have that problem now, so
Well, that's
I
good.
think it would be a good thing for them, and I think it would be good, the reflector's fine, but, you know, the use of it's intermittent. And,
This would be,
you know, one of the things that you will find too, that I found so far, and I've tried to find groups that are more technically oriented, that would talk about the kinds of things we typically talk about in the
yeah.
club, they're hard to find.
really?
And they're not on a fairly regular basis. So in the Bay Area there, of course, you have a lot of double E's and programmers, but they're not on the air a lot.
They're not technical groups there either. I mean, like this kind of a club would not be. You know,
Not that.
Like Don, our friend, you know, said, you can't find people that talk technical out there, you know?
No, I know. It's kind of a misnomer.
Well, I know, but they don't tend to do this kind of thing.
No.
apparently. It's not their culture or something.
Yeah, so, you know, somebody's got to take the initiative to essentially try to get a talk group number assigned. It'll be a
That'd be fun.
3-1 whatever, and, you know, 31075 I know from a podcast. That's how I heard about it. It's Bay Area users group. They went through the motions to get 31075 assigned to them, and that's exclusively theirs, so we can do the same thing.
Okay. Well, thank you.
Yeah. I'm glad Eric was here to back me up.
Well,
He had a lot
it all
of
helps to have-
information.